Shekhar Lapre, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India, one of the giants in the field of litigation and a person highly respected across the legal field. Sir is known for his acumen in the area of constitutional law and has argued in various landmark cases that have came before the Supreme Court. His contribution to handling complex issues involved, for example, in the Kaveri water dispute matter, the dispute going back to the 1970s and was finally resolved in 2018. Also, another case that I would like to highlight as a seminal case on Section 154 of CRPC, Lalita Kumari versus State of UP. Anyone who is associated with the legal field knows the importance of this case. Sir has also appeared in the Aruna Shanbhag case, and these cases go on to show his versatility in this field. Sir would be addressing a topic that came to fore after general elections and has gradually picked up with a lot of deliberation and discussion on social media platforms as well as lectures all around the country. I'm pretty sure this would be a fruitful session for all those who aren't able to join in right now, who can later watch this on YouTube. Lastly, I just want to say that all those who have turned into, please switch off your video and your audio. If you have any questions, then just write it in the chat box below, and I'll try to take up during the Q&A session without wasting more time. Sir, I welcome you to put your views on this.
Thank you for your kind words. Now, the topic of center-state relations in the context of COVID-19, a very vast subject. I will attempt to put it in capsule form. It's not possible for me to go into a lot of details. The center-state relationship with reference to the present situation has its roots in the Constitution of India. So unless we are familiar with the scheme of the Constitution, it's not possible for us to understand this relationship in the context of COVID-19. I will briefly set out the constitutional scheme. There is a debate amongst the jurists whether the Constitution of India has a unitary form of government with some federal features, or is it quasi-federal, as Professor Veer says. But our Supreme Court says that there is cooperative federalism, which informs the constitutional spirit. We need not go into the debates from a jurisprudential angle, but we need to briefly see the provisions of the Constitution. If you analyze the provisions of the Constitution, and more particularly parts 11, 12, and 18 of the Constitution, the conclusion that emerges is that the center has a dominating position. Why do I say that? Let's briefly examine. The dominating position has to be seen with reference to legislative power and the executive power. First, we'll see the executive powers. You have Articles 252, a proclamation of emergency. Once there is a proclamation of emergency on account of internal disturbance or war or aggression, etc., the executive powers of the Union go far beyond its legislative power. Normally, the executive power of the Union, that is of the central government, is coextensive with its legislative power. But once there is a proclamation of emergency, there is increase in its executive power, qua the states. And relatively, the executive powers of the state governments get diluted. The other article is financial emergency under Article 260. So far, we have not witnessed this situation, but the Constitution does make a provision for it. There also, once there is a proclamation of financial emergency, the executive power of the center increases substantially, and relatively, the power of the state governments substantially diluted. Of course, everybody is familiar now with Article 356. Once a state government is dismissed by the president on the ground that its affairs are not being conducted in accordance with the Constitution, both legislative powers and the executive powers come to the central government. This is where the Constitution distributes administrative powers. But there is one more aspect, that even during normal times, you have two important articles, that is Articles 256 and 257. Both these articles clearly indicate the dominating position of the central government. What they lay down is that the executive power of the state government shall be so exercised that it is in compliance with the executive power of the union and is in compliance with law made by the union parliament. It also says that in no case the executive power of the state government shall be so exercised as to impede the exercise of executive power of the central government. These provisions are of vital importance with reference to COVID-19. Then we go to briefly the legislative powers. Now, legislative powers is distributed between the center and the state by 7th schedule, read with Articles 245 to 255. In the 7th schedule, we have three lists. List 1, which is the union list, which contains 97 items. And if you peruse list 1, you will find that all important aspects of national economic and financial affairs are with the center. Income tax, customs, import and export duty, the Excise Act, now GST, service tax, now GST, so on and so forth. So financial power of the center, both legislative and executive, is enormous. Compared to that, in the state list, which has 66 items, the financial powers are very limited. It is confined basically to land revenue and agriculture income and some few other taxes. In fact, some of the provisions in the list 2, that is in the state list, clearly indicate that there is a supervening power of the parliament. So in other words, vis-a-vis the financial legislation and the financial powers, the center has a dominating role as compared to the states. Then there is third list, which we call as the concurrent list, which contains 41 items. So if you make a comparison between the legislative power of the state and the legislative power of the union with reference to important aspects of the governance, whether having financial implications or otherwise, you will find that, am I audible? You will find that the center has a very dominating role. I don't know whether I am.
Yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
Yeah, I am audible. So you find that the center is in a dominant position. Now, why is it so? It's a question which I must answer as briefly as possible. See, India is a vast country with a huge population consisting of people belonging to different language groups, different religious groups, different racial groups, having different cultural and social backgrounds. Their social and economic development, cultural development, educational development is vastly different. So, in a country like this, you need a stabilizing force. And that stabilizing force is the central government. This is inevitable. Now, in this relationship, where administrative powers are distributed between the center and the state, and the legislative powers are distributed between the center and the state, and the financial powers are distributed between the center and the state, and having regard to the fact that the Constitution of India, which is the source of all these powers, is a very complex and a very long document. And it is difficult to demarcate the precise power area of the center and the corresponding power area of the state on an a priori basis, because life is dynamic. The economic life and the financial life of the whole country as a whole is very dynamic. We have new challenges, we have new needs. So therefore, there has to be a measure of flexibility. And on account of absence of a clear demarcation between the power of the center and the state, there is a lot of scope for friction. This was clearly envisaged by the framers of the Constitution, and that is why you have Article 131 in the Constitution of India, which empowers the Supreme Court to adjudicate between the disputes between the central government and the state government. Now, I have dealt with administrative powers, I have dealt with legislative powers. Now let's come to financial powers. Now, important sources of revenue, as I indicated, are with the central government. State governments are relatively not in a better position. But the framers of the Constitution had a vision that even though the center has a vast financial powers, their financial powers will be so exercised that something will go to the state governments also. Article 270 and Article 280 are very important in the constitutional scheme. Article 270 lays down that whatever revenue that the center has earned through taxes and duties or cess, a certain percentage of that has to be assigned to the state, to individual states, depending upon how much was collected from that state. Take, for example, in the state of Maharashtra, 1,000 crores is collected by the central government in the form of income tax or other taxes. There is a certain percentage of that will be allotted to the state government. So in other words, the Constitution contemplates some financial support to the states from the center. Now, what should be that percentage is a source of friction. What Article 280 contemplates is that every 5 years or earlier than that, the president, which means effectively the central government, shall appoint a finance commission. And the finance commission shall make the recommendation what should be that percentage. Now, the central government studies the recommendations of the finance commission and decides the percentage. Now, this is the source of conflict. The states always have a feeling that if the state government, which is in power, is of a different political party than the political party which is in power in the center, it gets a stepmotherly treatment. This is the history. If you see the history of center-state frictions right from 1967, you will find this. Till 1967, we had one party rule substantially across the country, except Kerala, and only one party was in power both at the center and the states. Therefore, these problems did not acquire that kind of seriousness. But after 67, the political map of this country has substantially changed. So you have different political parties in power in the states and a different political party in power in the center. Take, for example, current situation. You have Anna DMK power in Tamil Nadu. You have Kerala, left front in Kerala. You have Congress in Rajasthan. You have a peculiar alliance in Maharashtra. You have Mamta Didi's party in power in West Bengal. And you have a BJP in center. Now, these account of these political differences and a political rivalry, there is bound to be a friction which put pressure on the working of the constitution. We can't run away from that. We also see that in the current situation. But I must say to the measure of all, to the credit of all state governments and also to the credit of the central government, that these differences have been kept in a very small area. In fact, what Supreme Court contemplated as cooperative federalism is taking shape. So I can say that the political maturity of political parties is one of the windfalls of the present situation. The parties have realized that unless we cooperate, unless the state machinery, the central machinery cooperate, the people will have a difficult time. And I hope and pray that this kind of political maturity continues after COVID-19 is also over. Perhaps I am asking for the moon, but no moon is also no. Brief background of the constitutional scheme, and I have indicated to you how this has a dominating role. And parties which are in power in the state government have always resented the domination of the center. This is a historical phenomenon. Nobody likes to have a superior power over him or over that his institution. So this is inherent. This kind of conflict is inherent in the situation. But the Article 131 and the approach of the Supreme Court has kept these differences in a smaller and smaller area. In fact, the Supreme Court has said time and again, even matters involving high political overtones, that we'll go by the constitutional morality and not by political consideration, because Supreme Court is the custodian of the Constitution. So we have a very stabilizing force in the Supreme Court of India, which would keep these differences or this tension between the center-state relationship within confined to reasonable limits. Now let's come to COVID-19. First, let us understand what is the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic. Now, epidemic is something which is confined to a region. It may spread even to a country, but pandemic is something which is global, which cuts across geographical boundaries, which cuts across national boundaries, and this is what we have seen. Probably in our lifetime, this is for the first time, some disease, some infection, some viral, some bacteria has created a havoc globally. Now, in a situation like this, it is bound to be in the scheme of things that the central government has a pivotal role. And the state governments have no alternative but to accept it. Now, let's consider two legislations which have substantial bearing on our present situation. One is the Epidemic Disease Act of 1897. This act was enacted during the British rule, where these problems were not of a global dimensions. We had something like plague, which were confined to certain parts of the country. But at a national level or at a global level, this kind of situation is not there. So this Epidemic Act of 1897 is a very scary piece of legislation. What that act does is, it empowers the state government. In its original avatar, the power was only with the state government, and the state government could frame regulations, and under those regulations, powers can be given to the government officers to isolate people who are affected, to isolate areas. Now we have the concept of red zone, orange zone, green zone. All these concepts of the state government, the provisions of the Epidemic Act. Similarly, there are other acts which supplement the power of the state government. You have section 144 of the Criminal Procedure Code, which empowers the police officer of a certain designation to prevent the assembly of people, more than 5 people at any place. Then the films, the places like places of entertainment, like drama theaters, cinema houses, the state government has power to stop the public, these theaters from working. So all these powers come to the state government through the Epidemic Disease Act. Similarly, the travel restrictions also come to the state government through this act. Now, this act has been amended by an ordinance which was issued by the central government on 22nd of April 2020. Now, what that ordinance has done is that that ordinance has given some powers to the central government, because prior to the ordinance, the central government did not have any power. The act essentially contemplated that the state government would take the action under the act. But now that by ordinance, the act has been amended and the central government has also assumed powers. Now, in addition to this, we have the most important legislation, what is known as the Disaster Management Act of 2005. Now, this act is an important piece of legislation. The focal point of this legislation is management of the disaster. The concept of disaster is very widely framed. It definitely takes into compass the epidemic or pandemic, which has a national or a global level. Now, what this act contemplates, it's a very comprehensive legislation. First, it creates 3 types of authorities. First is the National Disaster Management Authority, which is presided over by the Honorable Prime Minister. Then at the state level, you have a State Disaster Management Authority, which is presided over by the respective chief ministers of the states. And then you have the District Disaster Management Authority, which is normally to be presided over by the governor. Now, these 3 tiers of authorities, how would they coordinate? Let's examine that very briefly. First, the central government prepares a national plan. Now, what that national plan contemplates, I will briefly indicate. The national plan can be a very comprehensive document. It can take into compass, first of all, what we call as the capacity building. Capacity building. First, acquiring resources, which may be in the form of foodstuff, which may be in the hospital beds, which may be in the form of transport system, your railways, your lorries, your trucks, your private vehicles. So, this has power to develop capacity, which means develop and acquire the resources, material resources, for the purpose of dealing with the situation. First did they stopped railways, stopped the movement of vehicles, then the flights they cancelled, then those who came from abroad, they were subjected to medical tests, they were isolated. Similarly, those who traveled inside the country, whether by plane or by railway, they were also isolated. This is one aspect. This is an administrative aspect. The second is financial. Now, the national plan also makes a provision for appropriate financial resources. And such a thing is to be included in the national plan. There is no aspect of human life which does not fall within the four corners of the Disaster Management Act. You can be stopped from going out of your house. Normally, a citizen is free. After 1901D, I have a freedom to move throughout the territory of India. I can walk from Mumbai to Delhi, go to Kashmir walking. But the Disaster Management Act empowers the central government or the state government or the district management to prevent me from doing so. So in other words, the spread of this infection or spread of this disease, spread of this virus or bacteria is controlled. Now, there was some dispute in some states about expenses of migrant workers. Now, that's a very small area. Ultimately, it was resolved very cordially. I hope so. Now, similarly, we have at the national level a national plan. At the state level also, you must have a state plan. But the state plan must be in conformity with the national plan. Similarly, at a district level also, you have a district plan which must be in conformity with the state plan and the national plan. The dominant role of the central government is over the state plan, its finalization, its contents, and also over the district plan. So in a situation like this, when the whole country is defected, you must have seen that the power structure or the balance of power is bound to shift, heavily loaded in favor of the central government. This is inevitable in a situation like this. Now, how does this, what are the powers of the central government, state government, or even of, first, they have a power of requisition. Hotels can be for the purpose of creating hospitals or for the purpose of isolating those who are affected. Hospitals can be requisitioned for the purpose of treating patients. Not only that, according to me, the authorities have power to fix the treatment fees. I'm trying to find out to what extent this power has been exercised by the state governments or by the national government. Because a poor person can't afford to pay the medical costs. Now the state government and the district administration and even the central government are providing for free treatment to the medical patients, to those who are suffering from or who are suspected to be suffering from the COVID-19. In short, what I want to tell you is that the central government was alive to the seriousness of the situation, and the central government in turn activated the state governments. The state governments in turn activated the district authorities, and it's a global fight, and it's also our national fight, and every single doctor, every single person who is dealing with hospitals is helping us to fight this serious problem. Now, one of the reasons why ordinance was issued by the central government to amend the Epidemic Act, some doctors had to face a lot of social boycott, harassment, some of them were attacked. for various reasons. People were not getting admissions in the hospitals, people were not getting treatment. So the anger and the seething discontent had to come out. And the soft targets were these doctors or the hospital staff. Now, in order to stop this, the central government issued that ordinance and has made an attack on a doctor or a person working in the hospital a new offense. This is an offense in addition to the offenses under the Indian Penal Code. So the central government has created a proper infrastructure, administrative infrastructure, legal infrastructure. It has empowered the state governments and the district management through its orders, through its regulations, through its notifications under the Disaster Management Act. And similarly, the state government has also taken appropriate steps under the power that is given to them by the central government and also their own powers of framing regulations under the Epidemic Act. Now, this is where the situation stands. This subject is very vast. I have tried to cover it in 30 minutes. I can go on, but I believe that students and listeners will have a lot of questions.
Indeed, sir, a lot of questions from our viewers also coming in. They have posted some at the chat. Do you mind if I start the question and answer session?
Yes.
So the first question that we have.
Questions, I can add many things, but I believe that what I can add would come also in the form of questions. There won't be any repetition.
Yes, sir.
The person concerned will get satisfaction that I have answered his question.
Yes, sir. True. So with the first question that we have is with respect to the current issue that we have seen with respect to Article 131. So, State of Kerala filing a 131 petition with respect to the CAA matter, saying how it's unconstitutional. So, we wanted to get your views on that particular aspect. How could a state, it's actually a policy decision, and the state will not comply. Of course, we know that if a state does not comply with what center has said, let's say if Kerala says that we will not comply with, that will not follow the NPR rules or will not mandate that, it's a failure of the constitutional machinery.
I'm afraid that what has got to 19 subject. On that subject, I may give my views, but I don't think in the current situation we should deal with that because it's a very sensitive issue.
That's true. That's true, sir. Oh, not a problem, sir. I'll go on with some other. So the question with respect to the current topic is that we saw that how states were at the loggerheads with the center with respect to, for example, a lot of points that are there, like how much the lockdown should go or which state should pay for the migrants. There was a lot of issue with respect to train fare, and the states were actually left waiting for the center to come out with guidelines and were somewhat, at the mercy of the center to come out with things. So, what are your views on that, sir? In the sense that the states were at, I know they are at a subordinate position with respect to the center, but we saw this in the lockdown that how they weren't very much active in the play and the center was doing much.
See, the question, you are not very audible. Can you reframe it to sentences so that I can catch the essence of the question?
So my question is basically limited to as to the center-state relation during the COVID, as to how the states were left at the mercy of the center, to come out with guidelines and to come out with rules. But some of the states clearly said that we want to frame the guide. For example, there was an issue with respect to red, orange, and green list, which the center came out, but the state said that we should actually frame it. So there was a little tussle there. So I would like to get your views on that, sir.
Yeah. Now, I have said that constitutional scheme gives a dominating power to the center. Whether the states like it or not, that's the position in the constitution. Second aspect, the Disaster Management Act is a central law. And that law clearly indicates that it has an overriding effect. It overrides all other laws. Now, once you say that that act has an overriding effect, which means the executive power of the center, which is coextensive with its legislative power, the central's executive power is going to be dominant power. Now, in a way, the Disaster Management Act is a bit of a skeletal piece of legislation with reference to these technical aspects. What that act has done has created an administrative machinery. It has created a fund. It has created a legal regime for the purpose of dealing with the situation. But whether it should be red, whether it should be green, whether it should be orange, these are technical matters. Now, if every state government is left to decide what is good for it, it may create a crisis. See, this epidemic or this pandemic has a global impact. In fact, I would go to the extent of saying that even the central government decides to classify, it must take into consideration what WHO has, because it has a global impact. See, in thus technical matters, there is no scope for a political debate. This is a matter for experts to decide. And the question will arise, who constitute the experts? Now, that's an executive function under the Disaster Management. It's bound to be vested with the central government. You can't quarrel with that.
Sure. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thanks for answering that.
If every state government starts deciding its norms, we are heading towards chaos.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Correctly, sir. Correct, sir. So I have a question from one of our participants.
In this context, I would remind my friends that what Professor Galbraith had said in 1963, he had said that India is a functioning anarchy. I don't want this kind of.
Yes, sir.
See, as I said in my introduction, that central's power, both legislative, administrative, and financial, is a stabilizing force. Whether
Yes.
you like it or not.
Yes, sir. Correct, sir. Correct, sir. Correct, sir.
Yes.
So I have a question from one of our participants, Ankitesh Oja. So his question is that recently Delhi government made a decision to treat only the residents of Delhi in the Delhi hospitals. The LG nullified it. So don't you think that states must be given the liberty to take decision how their hospitals are going to function, sir?
Now, this again, the same issue. See, it's a human problem. Now, if a person from Bihar comes to Bombay for work and he falls a victim to this virus, then the Maharashtra government should say, no, you are a Bihari. You go to Bihar for this is inhuman. How can we talk in such terms? Human life is precious. You are a Bihari, Maharashtrian, Gujarati makes no difference. It is the duty, bounden duty of every state machinery, including that of the center, to treat every patient. In fact, the Act contemplates, Disaster Management Act contemplates no discrimination. What are we talking?
Yes, sir. Get it, sir. I think Ankitesh would get his answer from you. Another question that we have is, sir, with respect to the interstate migration that was happening, and there was a tussle between who would pay and all. So the question is, sir, do you think that so the question is actually, like, considering interstate migration is an entry in the union list, should it not be the duty of the union to pay for the migrants paying fare?
I will answer that. First of all, let's see the legislative act. We have Interstate Migration Act of 1979. Now, I wish some of my friends in the trade union movement take up this cause. That act has a very limited application. It defines a very narrow definition of a worker. Suppose I am a person who gets a contract. I am from Bombay and I get a contract in Bihar or some infrastructure project. Now I carry people from Bombay for the purpose of that contract. They are migrant workers under that law. But somebody from Bengal comes and works in my project in Bihar on his own. I don't recruit him through Bombay. He's not a migrant worker. Now the Bombay chap whom I take there is a migrant worker. The Bengali chap who comes there and works is not a migrant worker. So that act is of no use. Now, in a situation like this, the central act has to take care. Of course, that does not mean that the state government should not take care of people who are domiciled in its state and who go to other state for the purpose of earning their livelihood. When it comes to domicile, you are very strict with respect to admissions in educational colleges and other institutions. Then you say domicile, domicile. So therefore, this domicile concept is used often for a political purpose. But cutting across all this, it's a human problem and the life of a single individual is of great importance. That's a lesson that we must learn.
Sir, am I audible now?
Now, yes.
Sir, I'm sorry for diverting a little bit, sir, but I would like your personal views on a topic, sir, with respect to Schedule 9, sir. So, since we have seen that how people, for example, it was made for agrarian reforms and how to protect those laws, but it has today been misused by the executive and the legislature. Sir, could you just, in brief, give your personal views on that, sir?
How is it connected to COVID-19?
No, sir. That's why that's why I asked your permission to divert a little bit, sir.
My view is that Schedule 9 concept has gone too far. It has gone too far. Time has come. Of course, the Supreme Court is attempting to restrict. But if you see some of the items in Schedule 9, they have nothing to do with economic reforms, or certainly not with land reforms. But that's an aspect of political culture in this country. We can't help it. But my own view is that every entry in the list 9 must be seen with a microscope and there must be a closer scrutiny. Otherwise, it can lead to a complete annulment of the Constitution by putting all the draconian laws in the 9th schedule. Not possible.
The COVID crisis only. So the question is from one of our participants, Abhijit Ranjape. He is asking, the cooperative societies are not following the guidelines of state and even the central government, and the Supreme Courts are not sort of acting on it. So there's a misuse of autonomy, sir.
No, I couldn't understand the question.
So my question is from one of our participants. He's asking, with respect to the cooperative societies, the cooperative societies are not following the guidelines of the state, and not even the central government guidelines are being followed, and they are misusing their autonomy, sir. That
if they are violating the guidelines of the state or of the center, which are of a mandatory character, they are committing an offense, they can be prosecuted. That's a simple answer. Both these act and the Disaster Management Act also has a criminal element. It can be prosecuted.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Correctly, sir. Sir, I think.
There are specific offenses created under both the acts.
Yes, sir. Correct, sir. Just a minute, sir. I think we have one more question here. So, I would also like to state, sir, for example, we are also witnessing a lot of, some problems with respect to Delhi hospitals, and we have seen that in Gujarat hospitals as well, sir. The conditions that were seen at civil hospital in Ahmedabad and all of this, sir. So, of course, there's again with respect to Delhi, and now we have also seen in Puducherry also, but that's a different topic. But how there's a tussle between how to manage the hospital. There are some hospitals that are center managed, and then there are some that are managed by the state as well. And there's pathetic conditions being seen in both, and there's a tussle that we should follow the death audit board and also. So your views on that, sir? When it comes to hospitals, sir, the separation of power, sir.
The first problem is a country of this and magnitude of this problem and a huge number of people affected. Our existing resources are not adequate. Secondly, if you see in last 30-40 years, the medical world does not follow the same ethical norms which it used to follow earlier. There are many complaints against the doctors and hospitals. Now, how to improve their management is a big question. This in turn depends on, you see, there are adequate powers with the state government, and because of the Disaster Management Act, even with the central government, to issue a whip and make them perform their job properly.
Yes, sir.
But one of the difficulties that we face in human life is you can tell somebody you do your work properly, but how do you monitor it? There are complaints about doctors being rude. There are complaints about doctors being indifferent. But this kind of malaise is not confined to only medical world. It is there. Unfortunately, the cancer of apathy. In fact, I have always held the view that the science and technology has achieved so many things. We are going to Mars, Moon, and going even beyond the solar system, and maybe perhaps the whole cosmos will be moving about. But we have not found a solution to a basic human problem of apathy, indifference to the suffering of the fellow human beings. What's the answer to that? Neither legal system nor any other legal regime can make people sensitive to the suffering of the fellow human beings. That's the basic problem.
Yes, sir.
Otherwise, the governments have powers to cancel their license. All hospitals run on the license issued to them. They have the power. They must issue the whip. But even if they issue the whip and cancel the license, then that capacity goes. Then you are creating more problems. In a situation like this, it's not that easy to administer. It involves a complete control of the administrative machinery. All human beings have to change a bit. It's a moral crisis. No law has any solution.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We have a questions from one of our seniors here. So he's asking that, so for example, let's say, since you already told that there are different powers in different states, and there's always a tussle with the center. So can central government put president rule in any state if the state fails to control the situation or is not working according to the guidelines that you mentioned in this current situation, sir, with respect to this current?
Question is not, I have not understood the question. Huh? Yes, under the Disaster Management Act, it has ample powers to issue directions. See, I gave you constitutional framework or Article 256, 257, but in addition to that, provisions in the Disaster Management Act which empower the central government to directions to the state government. And how can they not follow and obey? That will be a constitutional impropriety.
Yes, sir.
I don't want to go that far as Article 350.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Correct. Sir, I think we have one more question here. So, I think it was with so some participants asked that the Ministry of Health and Family and Welfare drafted a bill that is Public Health Prevention, Control and Management of Epidemic, Bioterrorism, Disasters Bill 2017, which was supposed to repeal this Epidemic Act. So, had this bill become an act, then would it have curbed the friction created between the center state on this project? Because we know that this Epidemic Act is a British colonial act and has been working since then, sir. So, your views on this, sir?
See, 1997 Act thoroughly outdated. But since, fortunately for us, we did not have a situation like this. I think the last time this country was affected by plague, somewhere in 1908 or so. Now, thereafter, though we had influenza, but it was not of such a great magnitude as present situation is. Now, the Law Commission had made recommendations a long time back in this behalf. Now, unfortunately, the parliamentary procedure and parliamentary process as a response to the needs of the society is always bit slow. You will find that by the time the legislation is put on the anvil, the situation has again changed radically. It's like the traffic situation in Mumbai, Delhi, Calcutta, Madras. You build flyovers, bridges, and by the time you complete that project, the traffic has increased substantially. So this is bound to happen. Till we reach a situation where we attain the level of complete economic prosperity or Ram Rajya.
Correct, sir. So, last question that we'll be taking, and I think we'll be ending, sir. So, there is a question from one of our participants. It is with respect to that the invocation of the Disaster Management Act and the Epidemic Act have given the center sweeping power.
Disaster Management Act, yes.
And the Epidemic Act have given the center sweeping powers.
Yes.
But what could be said to be the extent of these powers? So, because we have seen some, for example, health and other subjects come under the state subject, and but of course the center is laying down guidelines. Sir, what do you think should be the?
See, these are sweeping powers. I have indicated. I indicated also that every aspect of human is within the ambit of this act, disaster management. It's a very comprehensive legislation. What it takes in its compass, it takes in its compass the travel mode. They can stop you from traveling. They can stop trains. They can stop buses. They can stop aeroplanes. They can stop working of factories. They can ask people, they can direct people not to go out. All these are wide powers. That is inevitable in a situation like that. It also takes in its compass relief work. I thought that somebody will ask me an interesting question about it. Now, under this act, there is an obligation on central government, state government, and district management to include in the plan relief work, to provide shelter, to provide water. Not only that, the act takes in its compass the minimum standard of such relief work. So how much water per person, what should be the food to a person, All these are there. Now, this is the job of NGOs. This is the job of organized people to come forward and put appropriate pressure on the respective state and authorities that what about this relief work? See, the problem in this country is that most of the so-called activists, they file PIL in the Supreme Court or in the High Court and the relief work. It's not possible. The government has limited resources. The center has created a fund. The Prime Minister has been appealing that contribute to the Prime Minister's fund or to the that special fund which has been created. But there is a debate going on. Why not in Prime Minister's Relief Fund and why this? These are all pointless things.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
When the nation is at such a critical juncture, people must learn to put an end to their political differences and deal with them after the war situation becomes normal. Then you can criticize anybody to your heart's content, no problem.
Correctly, sir. Correctly, said, sir. So, last question, and I think the question came. So, the question is with respect to the collaboration that we saw, that is administrative collaboration, we saw that. The question is with respect to the structure situation, with respect to financial and the structural, fiscal policies and with respect to structural policies, there are some incoherency between the state and center. Sir, your views on that, sir. How would we,
The center, as I said, is in a dominating position with reference to executive powers, with reference to legislative. Therefore, it follows logically that it must carry the financial burden also. You can't just have the power and no burden. One of the means of doing that, Finance Commission, that percentage of assignment of taxes to the states from the revenue earned by the central government through the central legislation, you will have to, some of the states are worst affected. They will require a larger percentage. Or in any case, this Disaster Management Act contemplates that central government should create a disaster management fund. Now, that fund allocation must be on equitable basis, must be based on justice, equity, and good governance. You must assess what are the needs of the concerned states. Of course, the states will try to inflate the figures, but by now you know which states are worst affected, or by now you also know which area in those states is worst affected. Accordingly, you can spend money. So Maharashtra does not mean the whole of Maharashtra, because there are so many areas in Maharashtra which are in green zone. Now, Goa is virtually out. Kerala is minimum effect. Some of the northeastern states are virtually out. But some political activists, of course, say, no, we want money. Now, this is of an objective of people who can take an objective view, and therefore, but ultimately the power is with the central government, and it is the moral and responsibility of the central government to allocate appropriate resources for the relief work and for the purposes connected to disaster management. The government can't abdicate its role.
Yes, sir. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct, sir. I think we have, due to positive time, we have to end it also. And it was really an engaging session. First of all, I would like to thank you, everyone who took out time to attend this lecture. I am grateful for Mr. Shekhar Nafaris for accepting our invitation for this webinar. It was indeed a very fruitful session with a lot of insights. Plus, it's always great to hear from an authority on a subject to gain more clarity rather than just debating on social media platforms. And again, I would like to thank you all for attending this, and hope to see you soon in our next webinar.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
No?